Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod to discuss MSU's upcoming game against the Wisconsin Badgers at home on Sunday. Before we begin, we'd like to thank all the supporters of the show. So special thanks to Patreon supporters at the Mateen Cleaves level: Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, Michael Bosnick, Chad Hickey, Mike Huntoon, and Scott Driscoll. Draymond Green supporters: Adam Walzak, Dan Rankin, James Benton, Jim L., David Brame, Paul Marsh, Doug Robinson, and Daniel Dranak, and all the Scott Scala supporters on Patreon as well as our Substack supporters: Rich Wagenheim, Kenneth Kremet, Roger Bronsink, Al, Michael Emmerich, and Joe in VT on Substack. So if you want to support the show, we really appreciate it, and it helps keep us going here. And head on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support. Okay, so the Spartans return home once again in first place in the Big Ten. We're recording this before the Michigan game, so just as far as Michigan State's currently solely in first place as we talk right now. Only 3 games left to go. Chance for an outright title is still definitely a reality. Win the final three, Izzo will walk away with his 11th league title. Also, that'd be a solo title, too, at this point. When we looked at the end of the schedule a few weeks ago, it was hard, at least for me, to envision Michigan State getting through it unscathed. But, so far they have pretty much done it outside of, that weird Indiana game. And they've been incrementally more, bigger games, more challenging. But in some ways, you look back at it, Michigan State's won 3 of the last 4 on the road against really good opponents. So that's not what you'd expect from a team. You'd expect it from, I guess, a championship team. But
Well,
I think we weren't really sure about that. At least
you
I
might have
wasn't.
answered you might have answered your own question
Right.
right
Yeah,
there.
exactly. You're
But you're
right.
correct. But you're correct to say heading into it, you don't know that. So is that demonstration of this team's championship bona fides? I'd say absolutely it is. Especially, it's not just any 3 road games.
Right.
It's
That's
the
just it. They're the hard
specific
ones.
ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think you're right. Each of these last 4 games has been incrementally more important. Each one more or less. I mean, I suppose you could argue that Michigan is always the most important especially when you're both at the top of the league. But I would say the win at Maryland was more impressive because I think Maryland's a better team and it's a
Yeah.
tougher environment.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I guess really in some ways you could say that each game was stepwise a more challenging test. Obviously it's tough winning
Yes.
on the road in Illinois, but that team's kind of been leaking oil and they're sort of just kind of dysfunctional in some ways. And of course, coming home, beating Purdue, which is a team that's been your bugaboo for a
Yeah.
lot of matchups, right, the last few years, and beating them, I would say handily, but kind of handily, and then going down to Ann Arbor against a team that's playing well, and they're certainly hard at home, and they handled Michigan pretty easily again, especially in the second half. And then to do that on the road, which you did in Maryland, which is even more impressive in some ways, although it is weird that Michigan State sort of has Maryland's number, and especially with last second shots. That's like 3 sort of momentous shots against Maryland. You have the NCAA
Yeah.
tournament when they were still in the ACC. That was before they joined the Big Ten. But then also, Cash Winston's 3-pointer at halftime, 5, 6 years ago, and then of course, Trey last night, the other night. So anyway, very impressive for Michigan State. Obviously, they've showed that they've got something going. And again, I think the hard thing for me, and I know for a lot of other people, is you don't see dominant players on this team. Someone who's scoring 25 points a game, it's like the carrying them over the finish line. It's really truly a collective effort, which you just don't see very often in,
No.
basically, and certainly not in pro basketball, but definitely not in college basketball either, usually.
But and that's I think that's the thing that everybody look, we're at the end of February. It's time to realize things are what they are by
Right.
this point, right? And you have to reorient. And frankly, Michigan State fans, in my opinion, should have done it quite a while ago. Reorient your understanding of what it means to be a very, very good team. Um, you're right that I've never seen an equation like this for Michigan State. Uh, but it's what this team has been doing all year. This
Yeah.
isn't new. It's been from pretty much from start to finish. This is who they've been. And, strength in numbers sounds like a cute slogan, like, Area 51 or some of these other dipshit things teams do, except in this case, it's absolutely real. And it's 100% on the money in describing what they are. And I would say this, although we've never seen this exact equation before at Michigan State, I said this to Jack Ebling the other day on his show. I can't think of a team that is more emblematic of Tom Izzo's whole approach for his whole career than this one.
Yeah.
He's always been a guy who has wanted to play a lot of people. He's been willing to give guys opportunities to play well within their role. I would argue there is no high level program in America that has made better use of walk ons, for example, than
Sure.
Michigan State over Tom Izzo's tenure. That's just one example of it. There's always opportunities available for guys if they work hard enough and if they're playing well enough, if they prove it. And this team is the ultimate embodiment, I think, of his ethos as a basketball coach. Doesn't mean he wants to do it this way every year, but it's what he's got with this team. And I think I compared it to AJ Hinch and the pitching chaos with the Tigers bullpen last year.
Yeah.
I really do think that's an apt comparison in some ways because, like Hinch, I think what Izzo has done is he hasn't lamented what he doesn't have. He's looked at what he does have and figured out there's a way to utilize what I've got that can win. And he's done that. And he's done that by utilizing every bit of this roster that he's got. And
Yeah.
that is a hard thing for a coach or for anybody to do because you have a natural tendency, you just referenced, it's been kind of hard for you to wrap your mind around this. Like, how is this working?
Yeah.
I think that's true for everybody. Probably is true for him. Most coaches want to know, I've got a guy. I mean, you even heard
Yeah.
it in the things Izzo said earlier this season, where you could almost feel him trying to will Jaden Akins into becoming that guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think at a certain point, he just kind of accepted because you don't hear him. The furthest he'll go now is say, if we can ever get Jaden shooting the ball the way he can shoot it, that's another level this team can go up. And I think everybody would agree with that. But you don't
Right.
hear him talking about Jaden's got to be the alpha anymore. Like, he's accepted it, and he accepted it a long time ago. That's not going to be the formula for this team. It's going to be exactly what we've seen night to night. The balance is going to change in terms of who's scoring, who's playing more minutes than others, maybe on a given night. It's constantly shifting within parameters, but it's constantly shifting. But boy, the the calls have been the correct ones to make in those regards. Who's getting minutes? Guys finding ways to step up when the team needs them to. And you can't the other thing too is that you need to put that bit of it out of your mind and look more and focus more on the macro stuff. So all the stuff we talk about
Yeah.
constantly about what Michigan State's strengths are as a team. When you look at it from that perspective, there's no mystery at all why
Right.
this team is where they are. They're not doing it with smoke and mirrors. I've occasionally heard some idiot or the other make reference to that kind of thing. That completely misunderstands what's going on. It couldn't be more incorrect. This is the furthest thing from smoke and mirrors. This team does many quantifiable things at an elite level. They are an elite rebounding team at both ends. They are currently
Mm.
number 16 in the country at both ends in rebounding. They have been a top 5 transition scoring team all year long. And to maintain that while playing the bulk of the Big Ten schedule is really impressive, I think. That
Yeah.
doesn't typically happen for Michigan State. Some of that is a result of changes in the Big Ten, but some of it is just how good this team is in transition. They are an elite team defending the three. And we're going to talk about that more in this podcast because it's going to be really important in this game. Um, they've been an elite team in terms of getting to the free throw line and converting when they get there. That's a little unusual for MSU, the getting there part,
Mm-hmm.
but it's what they so you add all those. They're a very good 2-point shooting team and a very good 2-point defending team. So you add all these things up, and I said, well, okay, the 3 point shooting is the one thing that's missing, but this idea that has evolved in this age of shot diet garbage that 3 point shots and dunks are the only two shots you should ever take. It is such an obsession. And I'll admit to, and I'm going to stop. I'll admit to having a problem with listening to people say Michigan State can't shoot. That misunderstands what a shot is, because Michigan State shoots really damn well. They don't shoot 3 point shots well, but that's not the be all and end all of shooting. For a lot of people, it's become that.
Yeah.
That's how far the obsession with threes has gone, is that they can't see the forest for the trees. So, all that is to say, it is not a mystery why Michigan State is succeeding when you look at it kind of that zoomed out view and you look at it from a team perspective. They do pretty much all the things that you would expect an elite level team to do.
Yeah. And we've seen certainly with defense the last few games, just partly depth, but partly just, I mean, the connectedness in defense and just playing really good team defense. They're really limiting other teams' ability to score. And so it's not like you'll see in baseball, the run differential, right? You'll see a team that might be 10 games above 500 and the run differential is like -6. You're like, yeah, so they are kind of lucky, right? This is not a
Yes.
team that's just skating by, that's just barely winning. They've not, I mean, I would think it's fair to say they've not been blown out this year at all, which is kind of weird to be
No,
almost this far in the season and to not have had a clunker where you just get run out of the gym. And it
no.
just hasn't happened this year.
Their point differential in the Big Ten is massively out in front of the rest of the league.
Yeah, like plus
So is their
103 or something, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
pretty
and
big.
the next best I think might be Purdue and like in the 40s.
Sure.
Their efficiency margin, so the difference between your offensive and defensive efficiencies, is way out in front of the rest of the league. And frankly, not that we're playing them this week, but if there's any team that by those measures has been extremely lucky, it's Michigan.
Yeah, right. Hmm.
Michigan's profile is more that of a seventh place team in this league than it is second. No, the way we count this stuff is who's got the most points on the scoreboard at the end of each game, and you are what you are there. So give them credit, but I guess it's more about the fact that by every real verifiable measure, Michigan State checks out as exactly what you think they are, a really good basketball team.
Yeah.
Don't let that get lost in anything else.
Yeah, you're right. And I think the two things you point to is the 3 point shooting. People focus on that. They're not very good for 3 point shooting on the season. And they don't have a dominant player who's,
Right.
in the mix for maybe even third team, maybe a third team Big Ten player, but
Yeah,
not probably second team or first team.
I don't dispute that. It's
Yeah.
incredibly. I don't know if I've ever seen it.
No, this is weird.
It
There's no
is.
question. Yeah.
So there's no arguing with that the equation that Michigan State has used is extremely rare. It almost, and I haven't done any kind of deep dives to figure this out, but it seems to me that very occasionally you might see this from a really good mid-major team where it's just kind of five guys that are all kind of good,
Hmm.
and there's not a lot of separation between them in terms of scoring, that kind of thing. But you certainly do not see it at the high major level, like, almost ever. So
All
it
right.
is
Well,
unusual, but again, the team wide stuff, the story is told there, and it's a
yeah.
very clear outcome. They're really good.
Yeah. And like you said, every sort of metric you can look at for the most part, they've check out as good. It's not just chance. It's not just the luck factor. So let's talk about Wisconsin. But before then, I just want to mention we don't talk about Jack Ebling very much, but you're on his show quite a bit, Drive with Jack. For those of you looking for more Michigan State content and just not Michigan State basketball specific, he's been very gracious having, I mean, you're on at least weekly, right? I would think. And so he's been very,
I'd say at least once every couple of weeks,
yeah,
sometimes weekly. Yeah.
probably more coming up here, I imagine, as we get closer to the
We'll
tournament and
see. I
stuff.
was I was on about an hour before yesterday's game.
There you go. So anyway, so thanks a lot to Jack. He's a very gracious guy. He knows, I think, everybody in Lansing, or pretty much everybody, as far as I could
Yeah.
tell. We had lunch with him. He was a little bothered by, I knew someone who's like some sort of booster to Michigan State, and he didn't know him. So it really kind of like, I think, threw him for a loop that he didn't know who this person was. So
Yeah, that would be very unusual.
yeah. So anyway, thanks a lot, Jake. And to get this to drive with Jack, since he's always plugging our show, at least we can do is mention his as well. Uh, so Michigan State is going to take on Wisconsin, as mentioned, Wednesday or Sunday afternoon. It's the only meeting between the two teams. It's the second to last home game for Michigan State. Obviously 3 games left in the season. Wisconsin's very good season. They're 22-6 overall, 12-5 in the Big Ten, and they're number 7 in the Ken Palm. By comparison, Michigan State's number 10. They're number 11 in the net. Michigan State's number 15.
Actually,
Uh,
Michigan State has risen to 12.
oh, 12 after the win at Maryland. Okay, so
Yeah.
now they're 12. So they're a very good team by the just overall, and it's not a typical Wisconsin team. We'll talk about it. Sort of offense, they come in at number 7, which generally in the past it's been because they value the ball real well, which they do. This team does as well.
Yep.
They're the 22nd turnovers, which is pretty good. I mean, they've been higher than that, but what's different about this team is that they shoot really, really well. They're 57th in threes, which at 36%. They're 22nd in 2-point shots, and they're number 1 in free throw percentage, even better than Michigan State at 83.3%, which checks out with good 3-point shooting. It's not that surprising. I guess you'd be a good free throw shooting team. Michigan State's more the outlier that they can shoot free throws really well, and they just can't shoot threes very well. But they do take a lot of threes. They're 19th in the country in 3-point field goal attempts, but unlike in Illinois that shoots a ton of threes, they actually make theirs. That's which makes them a lot more dangerous from on offense.
And
They
they
don't get the
actually shoot they actually shoot a higher percentage of their overall shots than Illinois does from three, which is shocking with how much Illinois puts those shots up. But
right. That is,
Wisconsin takes even more. And as you say, they make a lot more.
and since they shoot so many threes, it's not surprising perhaps that they have a very poor free throw rate. So they don't get to the line very often. They're 153rd when getting to the line. They shoot well when they get there, but they're not there often. And they do not offensive rebound at all, really. They're 227th, which is kind of typical for Wisconsin. They've always sort of had typical floor balance. Why don't we just stop there and talk about their offense first before we talk about the defense?
Yeah, it's not unheard of for Wisconsin teams in this Bo Ryan, Greg Gard era to have very efficient offenses, as you mentioned. Normally, that's been driven by a great turnover percentage, like they just never give possessions away, and that they shoot the ball well. And those two things are more or less normal. The turnover percentage may be slightly higher than Bo Ryan's elite teams,
Mm-hmm.
but anytime you're in the top 25, it's still pretty good.
Right.
And they shoot the ball very, very well. The difference is, as I guess we might as well talk about it now,
Their
by
pace.
Wisconsin standards, yeah, this is a fast team. Now, it's not a fast team by national standards, it's squarely in the middle. I think they're 191st in average length of offensive
Yep.
possession
Mm-hmm.
and 188th in overall tempo. So middling. But for
Yeah.
Wisconsin, I mean,
That's like going
that's
from a
like your
snail
that's like
to
your
a rabbit or something.
Paul Westhead's Loyola Marymount.
Yeah.
I mean, by Wisconsin standards, that's what this is. And their offensive structure is different. You know, Wisconsin always used to run, Bo Ryan's thing was the flex offense, which is a variant. I'm being very simplistic here, but it's a variant of motion offense. That's why Wisconsin, if you've paid attention over the years, although they've had lots of great guards, they've never been a team that was like Michigan State, really reliant on great point guard play, because in essence, they really don't prioritize one guy at the point. It's a cut, move, screen kind of offense. One of the things they always used to specialize in and were very effective with was inversion in the post. So that would
Mm-hmm.
mean bigs on the perimeter throwing the ball in the post to guards. They always seem to have those 6'4", 6'5" guards who could really be effective on the blocks when they would invert the offense. So those types of things. This is much more of a spread kind of approach, and for good reason, because they'll play 9 guys, as we'll go through their roster in a minute. All of them can shoot the three.
Yeah.
There's not a single guy they will play that is a non-shooting threat. You don't see that very often. And what that means is they have a great ability to spread defenses out, because you got
Sure.
to honor everybody as a shooter. And so that's enabled them to be even more effective offensively. When you can get an opponent spread out like that, it gives you opportunities. It gives you some easy drive lanes at times to the rim. Um, Makes it tougher for you to do some of the things that opponents will typically do to try to jam up your shooting on the arc. When you can spread everybody out, it's harder to provide effective help. If you think about the way Michigan State defends, being so gap oriented and help oriented defensively, it's harder to help. One thing, you don't want to help off a shooter, but even beyond that, you're just spread out. You might not even be in a position where it's viable, where it's a viable choice to make. So it's a very, very good offensive team. And unlike almost any Wisconsin team I can think of in the last 30 years, they're actually kind of fun to watch.
That's high praise.
It's
So,
true though. I mean,
yeah,
they're
right.
aesthetically, and I always had an appreciation for what they did. It was very effective, very efficient, and the bottom line, it's an Al Davis world. Just win, baby. And they've won. So I can't knock what they've done, but this is a much more pleasing brand of basketball. And it is something that Greg Gard, as I understand it, has been moving to steadily over the past 3 years. You have seen, and that's with some different personnel at times, although they, like Michigan State, like Purdue, they generally do a pretty good job of retention.
Hmm.
A lot of these guys we're going to talk about have been around for a little while in Madison. Not everybody, but a lot of them. And there's been a steady improvement in scoring average, in pace of play, all of those things over the last 3 years. And it's sort of culminated in this season.
Yeah. So talk about on the other end of the floor on defense, Wisconsin has been less steady than they've been in the past. And so this is, if you're going to look for a knock against this team, offensively, they've been really good, but defensively, they're kind of up and down. So
Yeah.
they come in at number 38, which is not terrible. It's pretty good. They're pretty good against the twos at 60, number 60, really good defensive rebounding, number 31. They don't foul much at 47th in opponent foul rate. The big problem they have is that they give up the 3 point defense is not good. So uh, I don't know what the ranking is, but they give up a pretty decent percentage of threes and decent volume. And we always talk about that, volume is obviously very important. If you're preventing shots, then obviously you can't make those. And so
Yeah.
that, and then also, how you defend those threes when they go up. But there's a luck component to that as well. But as we've seen with Michigan State this year, yes, there's a luck component, but Michigan State makes people take bad threes. And the fact that's exemplified by the fact that they're fourth in the country in 3 point defense percentage against.
Right.
Um,
It's also worth mentioning, if you remember, was it last year or the year before? Wisconsin had a year where their free throw defense was incredible.
yeah, they were. I think they actually had a couple years in a row where they picked the right
Okay.
people to foul or whatever, or maybe there was lots of bricking for
Out
chickens or something. But anyway, they're
out the window this year. Teams have shot free throws pretty well. Teams are shooting at like 73%,
so that's kind of
which
like
is
average.
a little bit, yeah, it ticks a little bit to the bottom half nationally. So they've run out of luck in that area. Defensively, the three has been the big problem, which, if you're a Michigan State fan,
That
that can
doesn't help
cut two
much.
ways, right?
Yeah.
Um, but even the 60th isn't terrible, but they've been inconsistent, and that goes for them defensively as a whole. That's been their problem, I think,
Hmm.
is that they're just they're not a bad defensive team, but they're not a consistent one. This is what I would say. I mentioned this last night in our Maryland post game. In my opinion, the Michigan State Maryland game, you saw two high level defensive teams. That's what
Sure.
high level defense at the high major level in college looks like. Whereas the game a couple nights prior in Lincoln between Michigan and Nebraska, those were two good defensive teams. Not great, inconsistent, mostly better than average,
Hmm.
but prone to some blowups. I put Wisconsin more in that category. Or Purdue is another example of a team like that, where it's not that they're terrible defensively. They're not Iowa or anything close to that,
Well, no,
but
no, there are a few Iowas, but
but
yeah,
they you can't you can't count on a consistent like with Michigan State. We've just come to expect this team is going to make it hard on opponents to score. They just are. And that how hard can vary a little bit night to night, but it's going to be a really, really rare thing for us to look up and say, wow, Michigan State just didn't guard anybody.
yeah,
These kind of teams, they'll have those nights occasionally.
yeah. And the only other thing I guess to talk about Wisconsin is they're not a pressure team. They're not a team that turns you over. They're 322nd in turnover percentage, which means they're almost dead last in the country is for D1 programs. So
Yeah, they
they
they've
don't
never
generate
been
a lot of
that.
turnovers. Yeah.
They've never been that, and they've always been um, a team that and it goes to explain to some extent why teams have gotten off a fair amount of threes against them, which also is historically not that unusual. Wisconsin has, I wouldn't describe them necessarily as a pure pack line defense over the course of the years, like Tony Bennett really popularized, where basically all five guys have a foot at least on the edge of the lane.
Hmm.
They're really going to make it impossible for you to get clean looks from two, but they'll give up threes. But Wisconsin philosophically is much closer to that. They always have been. So, um, yeah, it's not a team that's going to get out and pressure the ball. That's not what they do.
And I guess the final thing to talk about just briefly with Wisconsin is we've talked about this that the relationship with Greg Garden, the fan base or the is it's been sort of tenuous for a number of years. I mean, he kind of
Yeah.
came in a weird situation. He was sort of basically picked as an interim, but kind of forced as the head coach, similar to what you'd expect. Like, I'm not like an Izzo, but I mean, you had a legend you're coming behind, and so Bo Ryan had a lot of pull for who was going to be the to follow him, and so I think the athletic department he gave them no choice as to hire Greg Gard, but he's always been sort of like on the edge of whether is he going to go, is he going to stay, are they going to be able to, and he's won enough, and certainly this year is a good example where he's now. I think there's probably no talk about that. Where he's been just successful enough to maintain and hold on to that job, and Wisconsin has been a decent program. They certainly haven't been as good as they were under Bo Ryan, but they've been a very competitive program.
Yeah. And, I guess the one thing I would say, and not that any of them are listening to us, but the one thing I would say to Wisconsin people is be really careful what you wish for.
Yeah, of
Because I
course.
have vivid memories of what Wisconsin basketball was like
We
in the
both do. Yeah.
70s, 80s, and most of the 90s. Not good. Really not good. There is no birthright for Wisconsin to have very competitive basketball, you
Right.
know?
They don't even have like a great recruiting base in general, right? I mean, it's
Well,
okay, but
part of
it's not
that,
like amazing.
actually, I would say this. The one argument that those people lean on, and they might have a point to an extent, is the Wisconsin style of play under Bo Ryan and most of Greg Gard's run
Right.
people believe hurts them in recruiting, specifically with the more athletically gifted players in the state of Wisconsin. And the state of Wisconsin has, over the last 20 years or so, become a better talent producer. Milwaukee, Michigan State's had some guys from Wisconsin. Corey Lucius was one, Joey
Right.
Hauser via the transfer portal, but he was another. Um, and Marquette has had a lot of in-state guys that they've beaten Wisconsin out for. Generally speaking, the rule tended to be if a guy was an athlete, Wisconsin wasn't going to get him
Right.
because those guys want to play in a faster tempo game, blah, blah, blah. There is also some thought that Greg Gard's changes offensively that I mentioned over the last 3 years was a response to that, that he finally decided, hey, if I want to be competitive for these kind of players, and I think these kind of players are necessary to take us where we want to go, I've got to make this a little friendlier to the way they want to play. And there might be some truth to that. I mean, I
Yeah.
can't say
Sure.
that there isn't. Um, But yeah, it's an interesting thing with guard because you're right. He has been walking a tightrope pretty much from the moment he got the job. But Christ, he's had it now. What, it's like 8, 9 years, I
I
think.
was gonna say it seems like about 10 years, but it might, I don't know, it might not be quite
Not
that long.
quite, not quite 10, because 10 years ago would have been the year they went to the national championship game and
So yeah, probably 8 years
lost to
then.
Duke.
Eight's, yeah,
So,
eight's
and
probably
Bo
pretty close.
Ryan, I can't remember whether it was the next year or the one after that that he sort of retired, right at the start of the season and
Yeah,
left them with no choice but to hire guard. But if you look at Greg Gard's maybe missed the NCAA tournament twice, I think. It's still pretty. Nobody's going to beat Tom Izzo here, all right? But
right.
by human being standards, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good track record, and he's won I think a couple Big Ten titles, at least one.
Hmm.
He hasn't had a big NCAA tournament run. That would be one of the knocks against him. But from the outside looking in, I would say Greg Gard has done a good job at Wisconsin. Not a great one. I understand why people wouldn't want to label it great. I think that's fair, but he's done a good job. And
Yeah,
if you're going to make a change, be careful. Be really careful because it can go south in a hurry. And one thing Greg Gard has not done is let that program just slide. Like you could
right.
say they're not at the level they were when Bo Ryan was coaching, and that's accurate. But they haven't gone that far downhill. And this year's another prime example. Not a lot was expected of this team. Like they had their one, let's not forget, their star last year was AJ Storr, and he left for a big payday in Lawrence, which will go down as one of the worst portal decisions in the nation this year with the way that's gone. Goes to
I'm
show
not
you,
sure who. I'm not sure for whom.
to cite the great Irma Bombeck, the grass is not always greener on the other side of the septic tank. It doesn't always work that way, but they lost him, and so I think people looked around and said, "Well, is there any reason to?" They were. I don't even think they were seen as a consensus likely tournament team that
we
coming into this season.
we
And you
certainly
look
didn't
at
think
what they've
so. Yeah.
done. They are right now. They are one of only three teams that still has a mathematical chance at an outright Big Ten title.
Yep.
There are three more that could theoretically tie for it if disaster absolutely struck, but I don't think that's likely to happen. And actually, I don't know. Actually, I'm wrong about that because I don't think it's possible because Michigan and Michigan State, the worst that either one of them.
Well, as
Let
we're
me think
recording this,
about this.
Michigan could lose
No,
because they
they
have 4 games to play
they
still, not
could,
three.
yeah.
Yeah. So
So,
anyway, yeah,
but
mathematically
you
it's
get the
possible.
point.
Whereas we're recording, yes, for sure.
Wisconsin has a shot still, small, but a shot at an outright title, and very definitely still a shot at a share
Hmm.
um, if they can win this game in East Lansing. So that's that's pretty good stuff in a year where nothing was really expected of you, and this is not the first time he's done that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move in and talk about the players for Wisconsin. Brought to you by the Brothers Just Do Gutters. So all they do is gutters. You may not expect a lot much from your gutters, but you do expect them to function properly. So make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Make sure your downspouts work; they're not leaking. You don't have massive icicles forming on them. The brothers can take care of all that stuff. Things are thawing out a little bit. It's warming up. It's turning to rain from snow, and so you want to make sure that all those things are functioning properly now that we're hitting the rainy season. So contact the brothers now if you live on the east or the west side of the state. You can get 10% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. You can do that at our support page at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. Again, gutters aren't sexy, but they are really important. So make sure you got them working properly. All right. So we'll start with the starters. Obviously, Max Klesmit, who was injured and played only a portion of the Washington game. I think he's going to be back. He's kind of like a lower body injury, but anyway, he leads the team in assists. He's 6'4" senior, averaging a little under 10 points a game, shooting 35, 29, and 85. Has been a history of much better 3-point shooting in the past, and I think he's probably affected by his injury that he's been sort of dealing with. Leads the team in assists with 74 and just 31 turnovers.
Yeah, the shooting number is obviously way down from what I think he I want to say he was a near 40%
I
guy
thought it was like high
last
30s
year.
at worst. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, so he's the low shooter among the nine guys they'll play, assuming he plays. But uh, yeah, don't take it. It's very much analogous to what we think about as Michigan State people when we say, well, we know Trey Holloman's shooting 30% or whatever he's shooting, or Jaden Akins is shooting 29%.
Right.
We know that they're objectively better shooters than that number would suggest. They just haven't shot that well this year. Similar thing with Klesmit, in my view. I don't think you could afford to just let him go.
Yeah.
Like you need to honor him to some extent. Guard talked about that. You're right. He only the injury bit. I mean, he
Yeah.
only played a few minutes at the start of the Washington game, but that game was a blowout. And I kind of reading what Guard said, it sounded to me as if he was basically saying, we don't need you tonight, Max. Let's put you on ice. Let's try to get you better for the stretch run here and going into the tournament. I don't know about the severity of whatever's going on. I've heard the same things you did, lower body injury. Um, but this is a guy who's a capable player, and he's in his third year there, so he really understands what Guard wants to do at both ends. He's a good player, certainly when healthy.
Yeah. Then moving on to John Blackwell, 6'4" sophomore from Michigan. He played at Birmingham Brother Rice. He was a guy who was not highly recruited, I think, by the Michigan teams. And he signed real early with Wisconsin,
That's right.
and they found quite a gem. He's averaging 15.2 points a game, 5 rebounds a game. He's third on the team in assists at 62, but that's about a 1-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. Shooting 47, 34, and 80. He's definitely gives him some athletic ability. He had the really rough ending to that game against Oregon that they dropped at home, which put him in the predicament they're in now, where they have to pretty much win out, including a win in East Lansing. But he's a good player.
Yeah, definitely a guy that was undervalued. You're right that Michigan and Michigan State never offered. In fairness to them, he committed to Wisconsin when he was a junior.
Yeah,
So if he had let his recruitment play out, it might have been different. I don't know. Um, I don't think he would have ever. It's hard to say, I guess, but I don't think there would have ever been a likely path to him getting a Michigan State offer. I would speak with less confidence about Michigan. His father, he comes from Big Ten bloodlines. His father, Glenn Blackwell, was a great player in the 80s at Highland Park High School and then for Illinois on some very good Illinois teams. So it's funny that, normally guys who have a bloodline like that tend to get respect. His went the other way. Like he wasn't even the most hyped guy on Brother Rice, which is funny to think about now. But by the time he was a senior, I remember having conversations with a couple people who know the Catholic League, and it seemed to be pretty well understood by people who were paying attention that no, Blackwell's the guy on that team. He's actually the guy with the brightest future by far. There was a kid named Curtis Williams who went to Louisville, and I don't think he's at Louisville anymore. I think he was part of their purge, but he was the guy that got a little more hype than
okay,
Blackwell, and their college careers have been nowhere close. He's really good. The shooting efficiency from deep is way down from last year where he was crazy good, but his usage is also up. So you kind of
sure,
expect a little bit of that. Uh, he is the kind of player that we don't typically associate when you think about what Wisconsin basketball has been over the last 25 years or so. He's not the kind of guy you think of because he is athletic. But he's a really good player.
Next starter we have is John Tanji. So he's replacing AJ Storr, who was Wisconsin's everything player last year. He was first team Big Ten, wasn't he? I don't think he was Big
Yeah.
Ten Player of the Year, but it was quite a
No,
loss.
Zach Eady was.
Right? Yeah, that's right, of course. But he was like in the conversation for a guy
Yep.
if Zach Edey something happened to him. But
Yep.
yeah, right. And then of course AJ Storr went down to Kansas, and he's flamed out there. So that's one of those. Both teams have buyer's remorse, or the player and the team, certainly Kansas. And so they went into the portal, got John Tanji from from Missouri or Colorado State,
No,
right?
from Missouri.
From Missouri, because but he didn't play at Missouri because he's injured, right? Is that the
Right.
yeah? And then Wisconsin, of course, was in the play. They were in the mix for Frankie Fiddler as well. They didn't get him. He ended up going to Michigan State, obviously. So they sort of he was kind of like the afterthought. The next guy, 6'5", 220 pounds, senior now, and thought he'd help. And boy, he's done more than that. He's averaging almost 20 points a game, almost 5 rebounds a game, shooting 48, 39, 91. He also gets the line a lot. So he's one of the guys who does actually draw fouls. So 7 free throw attempts a game. He has just replaced Store. He's like the next Store. It's pretty impressive that they sort of hit gold twice in a row.
Uh, he's better than Store was last year. Store, if you remember, um, as the year went
Yeah,
on,
faded a little bit, didn't he?
he
Yeah,
faded, and specifically, he faded with the jumper.
right.
Like he was not able to. He ended up. I want to say he ended up like in the low 30s in 3-point percentage. Tanji's knocking on the door of 40.
Yeah,
Tanji is, but there are similarities. Like Store, he's athletic. He's really well put together. I mean, this is the definition of a power wing. But they struck gold here. And Tanji was kind of a weird deal because he was pretty good at Colorado State, transferred to Missouri. It absolutely did not work there. He was hurt. Missouri was abjectly awful last year, didn't win a game in the SEC. And so you can understand why he was looking to get out of there.
yeah, sure.
As it's turned out, Missouri's been very, very good this season. So it's worked out for everybody in that one. But Wisconsin got a go-to guy. And I would argue that at this point of the season, there are certainly guys with better NBA ceilings. There's no doubt about that. But at this point of the season, for what's going on right now, college basketball, John Tanji is the toughest cover in the Big Ten because he can do everything. He's obviously an effective jump shooter. He's good in the mid range. He's got a good enough handle and he's athletic enough. He can put pressure on you at the rim, uh, and he draws fouls and he hits free throws. 7 free throw attempts a game. That's big man. That's a big man number.
Yeah, right.
And he's doing his 6'5" wing. So he presents a real challenge for Michigan State because of the total package.
And then moving on, I feel like this is the third game in a row where Michigan State is facing two bigs
Yep.
in the starting rotation. So Nolan Winter, 6'11", 235-pound sophomore, kind of your classic Wisconsin big man, right? He's showed a little bit of promise his freshman year. Thought, well, if his shooting gets a little bit better, he's going to be a really good player. He's now averaging almost 10 points a game, almost 6 rebounds a game, shooting 57, 37, and 75. So he is a guy who definitely can stretch the floor.
Yeah, you could see this coming. The one, I guess, caveat to what you just said about it being typical, where I think Winter is a little atypical, is usually Wisconsin bigs, they'll often redshirt
Oh, okay.
as a freshman. And then even whenever their first year of actually playing comes around, usually they don't play that much. You see some hints, but it takes them a couple years to really get into the flow. And then by the time they're upperclassmen, they're really good. Winter has been an exception because you could see it last year that this was a guy who was on the come. And so it has not been a surprise, in my opinion, to see him play well. Uh, Almost 7 feet tall, and he's an effective 3-point shooter like everybody else on this team. You've got to respect him on the arc because he will pull and he'll hit a good percentage of them, especially if you don't cover him. And yet, his size enables him to do some things around the rim as well. So, really, really good young player. He's probably, when you look at this Wisconsin team, and you kind of project to next season, it's going to be he and Blackwell who become the
Mm-hmm.
focal points, assuming they keep them.
Yeah,
Which
can't
I,
assume
I
anything
would I
goes.
would assume at Wisconsin, more likely than not, they will. I know they lost AJ Store and
Well,
Chucky
he was a
Hepburn, but
Store's a
I
one-year
don't.
rental guy anyway, all the time. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, they lost Hepburn too, who was a long-term guy,
that's true.
uh, yeah, Winter's really good, and I think he's going to get even better.
And finally, rounding up the starting five is Student Kroll, 7-footer, 250-pounder, playing his COVID year, averaging almost 10 points a game, 5.5 rebounds a game, shooting 55, 36, and 84. Obviously, you remember last year, he tortured Michigan State from outside and kind of put that game away early in the first half, and Michigan State
Yep.
was really out of it.
Yeah, and he's, it's funny. He's also unusual at Wisconsin in this sense. He never really had the big breakthrough season. Like we're used to Wisconsin bigs by the time they're seniors, like, oh, that's a first or second team all conference guy, right? Like
Hmm.
there's a steady progression. Kroll kind of got here a couple years ago to this level, and he's just kind of stayed there, which is okay. He's a very good Big Ten player, but he's never had that breakthrough to the next level, which is just a little bit surprising because we've seen it so often from guys in that program over the last 2 3 decades, and that breakthrough didn't really happen with him. But he is what he is, another big who can do damage around the rim, and yet he can also hit enough threes. You got to respect him out there as well.
Moving on to the reserves, we'll start with Kamari McGee, 6 foot senior point guard. He's in his, I think, third season or fourth season
Yep,
in
third
Madison.
season.
He averaging 7 points a game, 54 assists to just 16 turnovers. So a really good backup point guard. Shooting 51, 54, and 87. Obviously, in a little bit less volume than other people, but he's clearly dangerous from outside. And he's really come up, improved his production from last year, where he's only averaging 2 points and a little over a rebound a game, or 2 points a game. And so he's really, and he's shooting much better too. He was before what shot 27% from three. Now he's 54.
Yeah, and the first season it was sub 20%. uh, his improvement is for as much as you could say there, maybe you didn't see Tanji being this,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and there have been some positive surprises with Wisconsin, but McGee is the one that is just from completely out in left field. I did not think he would be in their rotation. And the reason for that was twofold. One, he had not been good at all his first 2 years. I think he transferred in from Green Bay. Uh, and he had just not been good. They had had opportunities for him, and he had failed the test
Mm-hmm.
his first 2 years. And they brought in a guy, Daniel Freitag, who's a freshman guard, who they were very high on. And I looked at it and just thought, well, I don't see a role for McGee. Well, he's playing 20 minutes a game too. So that talk about a bolt out of the blue that nobody saw coming, he'd be number one on the list with this team. But the reality is, what he's done this year made him a very, very effective player. And that's what Wisconsin needed. They needed one other guard, especially when they figured out, okay, Tanji can really be like that Johnny Davis, AJ Storr kind of player. And you knew Blackwell was coming on, and Klesmet is solid at the very least. They just
Mm-hmm.
needed one other guy to kind of mop up reserve minutes there, and McGee has been that. So really impressive.
Then we have Northern Illinois transfer Xavier Amos, 6'7" junior, averaging a little under 4 points a game, almost 2 rebounds a game in 10 minutes, shooting 39, 33, and 73.
It's funny with him because his numbers are not spectacular, and I looked through his game splits, and it's kind of been consistently inconsistent the whole season. But it seems like every time I watch them, he's doing something positive. So my view of him was actually a little bit beyond what the numbers suggest he's done. But I think he's been an important addition because he's 6'7", so he's not really a big per se, but he can hang in there inside, and he's got a little bit of athletic ability, so he's a nice piece to have to just plug in and soak up some available minutes.
It's an easy move from DeKalb to Madison, not too far, long
No,
drive.
it's not.
All right, so then we have Carter Gilmore, 6'7", 230-pound senior, former walk-on, averaging 3.6 points a game, 2.5 rebounds a game, plays about 18 minutes, and he's shooting 49, 41, and 75. I mean, just further point that nobody here is really outside of Klesman is under 30%.
This is another guy though. Like he's never come close to this shooting wise. He's almost like a C minus Kenny Goins. I don't know how to. That might be uh, denigrating him a little bit, but just at fifth year of playing college basketball, and all of a sudden he's got a 3-point shot. But he's been a guy who has been in their rotation, earned a scholarship a while ago because he was one of those try hard guys. He was put together
Right.
enough that he could have a physical impact, and he'd go throw his body around and grab a rebound occasionally, muck things up. Uh, but now he's added, like, not that he takes a ton of them, but he's been a reliable shooter too, on top of all the other things he's always done. So he's another nice piece, and he's playing like 18 minutes a night, I think. So
Yeah, those
it's
real
it's
minutes.
not negligible contributions. Yeah.
And then finally, with Jack Janicki, 6'5" freshman, who's coming in averaging 2.1 points a game, 1.3 rebounds a game, plays about 11 minutes, and he shoots 43, 36, and 50.
Yeah, I mentioned Freitag. He was the guy who got hype, such as it was. I mean, it's not like he was a McDonald's All-American, but he was the guy Wisconsin fans seem to be excited about in that recruiting class. But he has not gotten into the rotation. This kid has. He's not playing a ton, but again, a wing with some size. He hits some shots occasionally. Just play a few minutes here and there to give the starters a blow, and that's really all they need from him.
All right, so I think it's pretty obvious, but who would you say Michigan needs to keep in the gutter? Brought to you by the Brothers of Just Two Gutters.
Well, one thought I have is that you always worry about guys coming back to their home state. So you hope that John Blackwell doesn't go off. But
Hmm.
and he's a really good scorer. He's their second leading scorer, but yeah, obviously it's Tanji. I mean,
Yeah, right.
he's the guy who creates the most problems. And I do think it's going to be fascinating, and I don't think we have an answer yet definitively as to who wins Big Ten Player of the Year. Braden Smith, I think, has been the leader in the clubhouse for a long time, but as Purdue's season has faded a little bit, it feels to me like his candidacy has maybe faded a little bit, and Tanji has played very, very well. So if Wisconsin, I would say if Wisconsin can even kind of hold on to second or third, I
Hmm.
don't even know that they have to win it. Tanji might be the guy.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting certainly to find out who gets it this year. All right, so moving on to Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, friends. If you have windows in your house, your business, high rise, apartment, whatever it might be, you need someone to make sure that clean them because let's be honest, you're not going to clean it yourself. Contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They have a very big region in the greater Grand Rapids area. You get 15% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. You can do that at our support page, of course, at tffinots.com/support. They cleaned our windows. They did fantastic work. They get on the ladders. They go out in any sort of weather right now. This is a good time to get it done. Similar to getting your gutter work done, this is a good time to get your windows clean. Make sure you get all things ready for spring and for the summer. So, the birds can run into your window. They won't see it that they were there. So, again,
Are you
you just,
are you are you using bird homicide as a selling point?
I mean, when your windows are really clean, it's dangerous for birds. It's just
It
that's the thing.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. I know. I mean, we're gonna be honest with people here, right?
Okay.
It's
Fair
just,
enough.
yeah. Please don't put like clean your windows and put like a bird feeder right next to them. That's just asking for trouble. Yeah. So, all right. So you can tell these are real live reads. All right. So now moving on to Who Cleans Glass Best, brought to you by the Squeegee Squad. Right now, Rod has a lead of 5 at 14-9. We're hoping we get 12 more games this season, so I still have time to catch up. You get to pick first. I picked first last game, and it didn't work out for me. We've actually I think the second pick has been in the snake draft has been doing pretty well the last few games.
Yeah. Well, and that's because Carson Cooper has been doing a really good job. I'm going to
Yeah.
go with Jackson Kohler though.
Yeah. I think it kind of
And
forced to.
Jackson was not the problem for you, by the way.
No, he was not. No,
Yeah.
he was not. He was a problem only that he didn't play many minutes in the first half because of foul trouble.
Because he could have been even more, but he
I
did
think he
tie
could
for the
have.
team lead.
Right, he
Yeah.
did, but I think he probably would have had a little bit more had he been out there a little longer. But
Yeah.
that's just part of the game.
I'm
And
going to
he's
go
have
with Jackson, though. This is,
yeah,
you mentioned another game, yet another game with two five-sized bigs in the starting lineup. I think it's a game that, barring foul trouble, we can expect Jackson to play a lot of minutes. And these are guys, the nice thing is with this one, and it's worth mentioning, as opposed to the last two matchups where you were dealing with four men that are very unusual in terms of their ball handling, passing ability,
yeah,
the way that they play. Winter is a much more conventional big four man. So hopefully that means it's going to be easier for Jackson to stay on the floor. That he won't have pressure put on him in the same way.
right, exactly. Yeah, these are guys who they're gonna roll or but they're not gonna drive from the on a ball screen or something on
Yeah.
outside, right? Yeah. So I get to the next two picks. I'm obviously going to go with Cooper. He's the obvious second pick. And, like just the same way I dress in the spring, I always dress for the day before. I'll go with Richardson. He's had two good solid games. There's the third pick, I think, is always hard here. So it could be basically anyone. This is the random pick. So I'm just going with Richardson and hope he
Okay,
just keeps things rolling.
that's interesting. Well, I
I
think
didn't write one down here ahead of time for you, just so you know. Before I've written down your
you
picks
wrote one
before you
down.
made them.
Okay, we'll see
Well, I
if.
had Kohler written down because I knew you were going to go with Kohler, but
All
then
right, but did you have my second pick
I
down
didn't.
or
That's
no?
why I said I don't have one. I
Oh,
wasn't sure
all
where you're going
right.
to
Well,
go.
I'm
I'm
gonna
like, I
talk
thought
it
probably
through.
Carr, but I will see.
I'm gonna talk it through for a second.
Okay. You're
Is an
stalling.
argument for
Okay, go ahead.
Zapala because I think Zapala has been playing very well lately. And again, you're going up against legit bigs,
Yep.
so there's every reason to think he'll play a lot of minutes. But I think the presence of Tanjay means we could see even maybe a little more of Cohen than we've been seeing lately.
Yep.
Like in the Maryland game, Carr obviously had an impact. He did some things and he played, but that was not a game where I thought there was the same need for him from a matchup perspective. Now, sometimes Michigan State doesn't care about that. They want Cohen in there to do the things that he does,
Right.
regardless. But you know what I mean? Maryland did not have and the guy who probably plays closest to that kind of game for them is Miguel, and he was in foul trouble. So
Yep.
you didn't have to counter him as much. In this game, Tanji presents such a physical uh, issue for you that because of all the things he can do and the way he's put together, his size. Jaden's going to start on him, I'm sure, and Jaden will play a lot against him. But I think there's room for Cohen, and so I am going to go with Cohen.
Yep. I think that's a pretty reasonable approach. So then going into the five keys of the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. If you need Spartan apparel or apparel for the Hoosiers, the Hawkeyes, or any number of other schools, there's a massive selection. Strangely, one of the largest selections is Texas State, outside of Michigan State, obviously, which is Dom's old hunch, who we'll have on at some point for bracketometry.
Or it's
But
his
you had a,
time of year. Yeah.
yeah, it is getting to that time of year for sure. We start talking seating, and maybe we'll bring him on next week or something when we're getting ready for because then we're getting pretty close as we get to seating, talking about real lines. We just have a few games left in the regular season. Anyway, Nudge Printing, nudgeprinting.com. Huge selection of Michigan State stuff, whether it's apparel, whether you're looking for stickers for your computer, for your wall, cornhole. They do all that stuff with the nice laser printing. They do screen printing for all their apparel, so it's sustained by all the washes. I just got some more stuff from my wife and my daughter. It's really high quality stuff, great price. I don't know, you can't go wrong, and it's nice Michigan business to support as well as some fellow Spartans. So head over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. Don't forget, as a listener to the show, you get 20% off if you type in Final Four, just one word, into checkout. All right, so the first key to the game is, quite obviously, guarding the arc. Wisconsin is a fantastic three-point shooting team, one of the best in the country. They have a high percentage of shots that come from three. Michigan State has been elite as far as defending the three. So this is one of those immovable rock, objects and
Yeah.
right. So we'll see which one actually gives here.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see how MSU opts to play them. I'm. This is my thought. We'll see if it ends up being the way that Tom Izzo thought about it. I think when it's as important to what you do as a 3-point shot is to Wisconsin, your defensive philosophy probably needs to start there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I expect Michigan State to do some of the same things we saw them do in the Breslin game against Illinois,
Right.
where
Max protect sort of the
they're
3-point line.
really conscious of pressing up and trying to take away good 3-point looks. Now, if that's how they play it, then the question becomes, how does Wisconsin adjust to that? Are they still able to get looks off despite Michigan State doing that? Are they conscious of trying to slip screeners to the rim the way Illinois did with a good deal of success
Mm-hmm.
in that game? That, and can Michigan State counter that? That's going to be a fascinating chess match. But my assumption is that in the past, when Michigan State has faced a team in the conference, especially that has 3-point shooting as this significant a part of what they do, and they're as good at it as Wisconsin is. So it's not even just, hey, they take a lot, it's how many of them do they hit? They've typically oriented themselves to take that away. And that's what
Right.
I'm expecting.
Second key of the game is, of course, the boards. Wisconsin does not offensive rebound hardly at all, so this really shouldn't be an issue defensive rebounding for Michigan State. They're, as Michigan State, as you mentioned before, the elite defensive rebounding team. But Michigan State is a really good offensive rebounding team. They get a lot of extra possessions. Assuming the turnover margins in the favor of Wisconsin, can you make up some of those extra possessions and chances to score with some offensive rebounding? But Wisconsin's a very good defensive rebounding team at 31st.
Yeah, it's strength on strength, although Michigan State's offensive rebounding is a little better than Wisconsin's defensive rebounding. It's not a huge gap. So you have to hope, if you're MSU, that you can find a way to carve out enough of an advantage there that it offsets whatever issues there might be in terms of turnovers. And look, I mean, as we talked about, Wisconsin doesn't ball hawk. So
Right.
if Michigan State has turnover problems, it's going to be self-inflicted, and so you have to hope that doesn't happen. And if it doesn't, then this could be a low turnover game both ways.
Right. So the third key to the game is transition game. You don't expect a lot with Wisconsin. Obviously, they play a little bit faster than they have in the past, but this is a team that doesn't offensive rebound much, so you expect that they sort of value floor balance more, so to try and minimize the transition. It was certainly interesting that Maryland was very successful with a full court press. I don't expect Wisconsin to do the
No,
same thing to try and
you
slow
will not
things
see
down,
that.
but it certainly it was effective in preventing Michigan State from getting a lot done. But not all the time. They did get sprung loose for what, 10 or 11 points, I think. Fast break
11,
last game.
11.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I think this, obviously, the press, especially the way Maryland played it without gambling unnecessarily, can
Hmm.
be a really effective way of slowing a transition game down. But it's not the only way to skin a cat.
Right.
Over the years, there's been nobody, with the possible exception of Matt Painter at Purdue, who's been as good at slowing down the Michigan State transition game as Wisconsin. So they know what they're doing. And I expect that they will limit the chances. That said, if this is going to be as competitive a game as I expect, then every point counts.
Hmm.
And we saw against Maryland. Maryland did a great job, right? Really good job. Michigan State still got 11 fast break points.
Right.
So if they can find opportunities, and they got to take the ones that are there. I go back to that play we mentioned in last night's post game where they got the ball in the middle to Cohen. It was the one time they really punished it. Got the ball in the middle to Cohen, and he just took off, went down the lane, and found Zapala for a dunk. When those moments happen, and they won't be the same kind of moments because Wisconsin won't press, but when those kind of moments happen, you got to take advantage. And
Yep.
how often they can do that, if they can get 12 transition points, that might be enough to make a difference.
Another thing that maybe a difference is a free throw line. Again, this is really kind of an example of strength on strength. Almost all these keys, because this one, Michigan State, excellent free throw shooting team. Wisconsin, even better, although Wisconsin doesn't get there quite as often as Michigan State. So, are you going to be able to, are you going to be able to have an opportunity to get an advantage here from the free throw line? You would hope you get a home whistle. I don't feel like we get a home whistle a lot, but I guess like statistically, there's some advantage at Michigan State, like 3 extra fouls per game or something like that, which is more than most teams in the league. So it doesn't feel that way, but that's just because I only remember the ones that hurt my team.
And I will, rightly or wrongly, I will suggest to you that we'll take the West Coast teams out of it because they haven't been around long enough. But there are 13 other fan bases in the Big Ten that vehemently disagree with you.
I know, I'm sure, no question.
Yeah. I look, I think you're right too. I feel that Michigan State doesn't ever get enough respect at Breslin, but reasonable minds can differ.
Yeah.
Uh, I I think this is another important one because again, if it's a game you expect to be close, then oftentimes that gets decided on the margins, just very slim edges in certain areas. And so Michigan State, just objectively taking the home whistle out of it, both teams shoot free throws exceptionally well. Michigan State gets there a fair amount more than Wisconsin. I mean, there's not like a massive, massive gap
Hmm.
like there, ironically, like there was in the Maryland game, which didn't pan out that way.
Yeah.
But there is a gap. And so, which again, not surprising when you look at the two teams and their the way their offenses function.
Right.
Michigan State doesn't take many threes. Forget about hitting them; they don't take many. Wisconsin takes a ton. That generally means you're not drawing fouls all that often,
Right.
you
Exactly.
know. So it stands to reason. If Michigan State can get a little bit of an edge here, say maybe four more made free throws, something like that. Nothing crazy. That could be a difference maker.
All right. And the fifth and final key to the game is a typo on my screen here that did not notice. It's not tongue. It's actually Tanji.
Uh,
Yeah. So,
that must have been autocorrect.
it is autocorrect. It's sometimes great, but sometimes not so much. Anyway, so obviously he's fantastic. He's, as you mentioned, Big Ten Player of the Year candidate. He's certainly in the mix in the conversation. He's had over 30 points a couple times this year already. So, I mean, he's a guy who can really hurt you. And Michigan State, generally speaking, I feel like this year have been able to take away most teams' first options. Is certainly late in the season.
They have. It's actually four times above 30 points. It's twice in Big Ten play. But four times over the course of the season, he's topped 30, and one of those he topped 40. So, one thing that tells you, though, is unlike a lot of great scorers, I won't describe Tanji as a feast or famine guy because that's unfair to him. But I will say, for a great scorer, he has been a little more prone to, say, the odd single digit game than you typically see. It would be nice if he had one on Sunday.
I love it.
Uh, but yeah, as we've mentioned, I think he's the toughest individual cover in the conference. I really do. Just the total package that he has makes him very, very difficult to deal with. The nice thing for Michigan State, they got a lot of guys they can throw at him.
Yeah, I was gonna
And
say you can.
and so
Yeah.
this is a little different game than some of the more recent ones. You think about the Purdue game, you think about Maryland, where the focal point was really on stopping the point guard. That's the engine
Right.
that makes those teams go. This team doesn't really have McGee is a conventional point guard, but he's a reserve. They don't start a conventional point guard. And Tanji is really the engine that makes it go, in my view. So um, that's where you would think that the focal point will be defensively for Michigan State is, and again, like with any of these great players, you're not going to shut them out. What you
Right.
want to do is you want to make him less efficient than he normally is. You want to make him have to expend a lot of energy to get whatever he does get. And figure that those things, if you can get those things done, that's going to leave you in a very good position late in the game to put it away.
All right. Well, this is the second to last game for Michigan State at the Breslin Center. It'll be senior night after that against Michigan. If Michigan State wins this game, I think we can safely say Michigan State has won the Big Ten title. I mean, it'd be hard to imagine they wouldn't. I mean, I guess it's possible. Depends what Michigan does. If Michigan runs the table and then beats them in Breslin Center. But at this point, I think, that would obviously eliminate Wisconsin from the conversation for Big
Yep,
Ten title. And then your two remaining games, you're at Iowa and then home against Michigan. You think worst case scenario, you split those. So I guess it comes down to Michigan, obviously, if they can keep winning
that's
games by
correct.
2 or 3 points. But at this point, you figure if you've beaten Wisconsin, you've kind of beaten the pretty much everybody in the conference. And
I,
so
I wanna add really a quasi sixth key, and it's not really a key, but it's a number that I think is worth mentioning because you've heard us say a lot of very positive things about Wisconsin, and with good reason.
hmm
They're a good team. They've played very well. But I took a look at the records these two teams have against the top eight in the conference, which also includes both of them. So it's really only games against seven other teams, right?
sure. Right.
Uh, Michigan State, well, I'll start with Wisconsin. Against those teams, Wisconsin is 2-5 coming into this game. Michigan State is 6-1.
Hmm.
I think that probably tells us something. And it's something that gets beyond the macro stats and even the individual stats that we've spent a lot of time talking about. And again, rightly so. I think it's fair to say that, and it's funny because you had people coming at Michigan State heading into this stretch, or
Yeah.
even before that, when they went out to California, say, well, they haven't played anybody. Then we're going to see what happens when they're playing these real teams, right? Well, what we've seen is, especially lately, Michigan State's handled that as well as you could.
Yep.
Wisconsin, when you're 2-5 against teams with winning, there are only 8 teams in this conference with a winning league record. And so that includes Oregon and Illinois down there, barely winning records. But they've lost to both of those teams.
Right.
Um, it's it does say something. To me, it says, hey, if there's anybody in this thing that is maybe a little suspect, it's the team that's 2-5 against the good opponents, not the team that's 6-1.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so I think that's something to think about. And then one other, it's not a number because I didn't crunch the exact stats, but Wisconsin's lost 5 games in the league so far. In 4 of those 5 losses, they have been sub 35%, so under their seasonal average from 3, and most of those way under, like in the 20s. The one exception was their loss to UCLA. They actually did shoot 50% from 3. But I think what it further buttresses that first key that we had, which
Yeah. Right.
is you got to guard the arc in this game if you're Michigan State.
And
And
that's how they win.
if
Yeah.
you can do that successfully, you can make them inefficient. Boy, you got a great chance to come away with a win.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, my opinion and of the teams of the Big Ten has changed. Obviously, of course, they do throughout the season as you watch teams play each other, especially
Sure.
when we made the turn halfway through the season. All the top teams or the perceived top teams really hadn't played each other hardly at all. I mean, I think Michigan State
Yep.
played Illinois once, and that was kind of it. They hadn't played anybody else. And so now they've kind of played, well, basically everybody but Wisconsin and Iowa at this point. And I feel like the best team is Michigan State right now. I think number 2 is Maryland. If you put people on a neutral floor, third is hard to say. Would that be Wisconsin? I don't know if I'd say it's Wisconsin, or I don't know who I'd rather play. Maybe it
I,
may
I
just
think
depend on
it's
the
I think it
night.
gets really close at that point
Yeah, like it
because
could be UCLA, it could be
I
any
think with
number of teams.
the next 4 teams, you could really put them in a hat.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
do think Maryland is clearly the second best. But once you get past that, yeah, it's kind of matchups night to night, you know, inconsistencies with all those teams. I think in terms of ceiling, and this is my probably defensive bias showing, I think of that group, I think when playing well, when they're all playing near their best, the best of that group, I would say, is UCLA. But you can argue that reasonable minds can differ.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know
Um,
the best ceiling is in Illinois, but the
yeah.
next best ceiling.
Well, they're not in this discussion. That's why we haven't mentioned them. They're
Yeah, right.
below this group.
Yeah. They're stealing some team's floor. All right. Well, I think we'll close it there. We'll be back live again after the Wisconsin game when I get back from East Lansing. And so check out our sponsors and a support page at thefinalfoursontheschedule.com/support. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.